Hey there, my name is Kristian Andersen, and I am a 1996 graduate of Andersen University, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my entrepreneurial journey and where that intersects with my thinking around entrepreneurship and innovation. So, a little background on me. I'm married to my lovely wife, Brandy, and we have 6 children, and I live in Indianapolis, Indiana. My story is pretty convoluted. I didn't take a direct line really to anything. I was born in New York City. Counterintuitively, I was raised in Arkansas, just outside of Little Rock, in a little town called Conway. And that's really where, personally, my kind of life of entrepreneurship began. It's interesting, people ask frequently, how do you spot an entrepreneur? And frankly, I think it's pretty easy. Most of the folks I work with all have shockingly similar stories. Most of them got sent home from elementary school for buying lemon heads at the 7-Eleven and marking them up 200% and selling them on the playground, or starting a lawn mowing business with their buddies, but by the end of the summer, they weren't doing any lawn mowing. They were just marketing the company, and their 5 friends were doing the manual labor. And it's shocking. Those are 2 specific examples, but it really holds true, I think, for most people, at least that I know, that end up kind of making a successful career in entrepreneurship. I went to college at Andersen University. It's interesting, I had no connections to the state, no family here, no siblings or parents that attended the university, but really loved my experience here, and I credit it with so much of the joy and success I've had in life to date. I'm a proud Hoosier today, and that would not have been the case had I not come to school at Andersen. So after school, I had a real job for about 6 months, and where I was then unceremoniously let go because the company ran out of money. And as many things in life, that ended up being a pretty profound blessing in disguise, because the same guy who fired me turned around, started another company, encouraged me to hang up my own shingle, and became my first customer. So that all kind of worked out pretty cool. I then went on to start a design consulting firm called Studio Science, which really worked exclusively with pretty big venture-backed high-growth technology companies, and spent the better part of 2 decades running that business before selling it to a group of investors a couple of years ago. I met my lovely wife, Brandy, from Texas, who now also is a proud Hoosier, and began to grow that business. And I think there's some correlation in meeting my wife and my ambition level also increasing in lockstep with that. So business grew 2x the year we got married. When you're working for more than yourself, that's pretty important. But I got tired of selling brains by the pound, right? And anyone who works in consulting, you're killing what you eat. You go find more work, you hire more people, and that's how you scale. And I'm looking around at my customers who were building product-based businesses that were scaling independently of how many people they were hiring and whether or not they were behind a desk. And I decided I wanted to do something like that. I began angel investing as an individual into technology companies, which ultimately led me to founding a venture capital fund with my partner, Mike Fitzgerald, many years ago, which is funny because I have a design degree from Andersen University, and to the best of my recollection, never took one business class, and I'm not particularly good at math. But one thing, I guess they say, it's better to be lucky than smart. That fund performed, and then I thought, I've really enjoyed working with these types of companies. I've enjoyed investing in them, and I decided to try my hand at starting some of these companies. So with a handful of really wonderful partners, coming out of Studio Science, launched a labs initiative and started starting software companies, a handful of which went on to be real companies, as they say. All venture-backed, and all either to date either acquired or still growing at a pretty rapid clip. And that kind of long, convoluted journey is what led me to my current day job, which is a company called High Alpha, which I, along with my 3 terrific partners, founded 6 years ago in Indianapolis. We are a venture studio, probably the largest in the country, if not the world, at this juncture. And it's a new business model, but it's a lot of fun. So it's really two things. We're an operating company that starts companies. So think of a company whose product is starting other companies. And we've started 30 to date, and a venture fund. So we have raised 3 funds. We're now investing out of a $110 million vehicle, and we're focused exclusively on supporting entrepreneurs that are trying to disrupt the world with technology. A real quick snapshot is I run a team that does really nothing but works on ideas. So we get up every morning trying to invent the future, and we take those ideas and run them through a proprietary process that culminates in something we call a sprint week. At the end of that week, we pick one of those ideas, we open up a bank account, deposit a good-sized check in it, and start the business. For someone like me who loves living at the intersection of design and entrepreneurship and investing, it's really a dream job. So what have I learned over the last 20 years that I think is kind of relevant to people who are exploring careers in entrepreneurship or innovation or design? Well, number one, it's that the majority is usually wrong. And I think that's something you've got to get really comfortable with if you're going to pursue an entrepreneurial journey. Well, the majority isn't usually wrong, they're always wrong. Or put another way, they're always wrong, but only usually. And what I mean by that is if you're doing something sufficiently disruptive, the rest of the world is going to look at it as if it's foolish. If the balance of the world believed fully in the future you were trying to invent, it would have already been invented. So I just think it's really important because it's a lonely, hard job where you're railing against kind of entrenched structures, whether they be business, political, financial, cultural. And so getting comfortable with the fact that you're not gauging your success or your progress based on what the rest of the world says about it, I think is really important. You know, the other thing, well, there's a few things, but for me, one of the most important is creativity. And we tend to relegate that to the world of kind of black turtleneck wearing, beret sporting hipster doofuses, but creativity is in reality something that we're all born with. Very few of us learn how to exercise it and build that muscle, but it's a critical raw input for what the MBAs like to call innovation. So what's innovation? I think of it as the commercialization of creativity and moving it out of the realm of the artist studio and into the boardroom. You know, in biology, there's this idea of beneficial mutations, right? So the idea that some things have to go wrong in order for the world to discover things that ultimately will be right. And I think innovation works in a very similar capacity. You have to be open to exploring divergent thinking, leaning into mutations that are happening in your worldview. You know, innovators excel at not inventing something wholly new, but typically combining constituent elements that already exist into a new form or a new shape. My favorite, of course, example being the Reese's Peanut Butter Cup. So what should you do if you want to cultivate that sensibility within yourself? Well, number one, I think you need to nurture divergent thoughts, which is like not popular, because having divergent thoughts is uncomfortable. It can put you at odds with other people in your life. In certain countries, it can get you thrown in jail or killed. But I do think it is a critical component of entrepreneurship and innovation. There's a great quote by Paul Graham, who's a really well-known essayist in the technology space. He was the founder of the tech accelerator Y Combinator, which is widely thought of as the model for the tech accelerator industry. And he said, to do good work, you need a brain that can go anywhere, and you especially need a brain that's in the habit of going where it's not supposed to. Ruminate on that for a minute. You know, since I'm in the process of quoting lots of folks, and I'll quote Peter Thiel. When he's interviewing somebody new, one of the questions he always asks them is, what important truth do very few people agree with you on? Right? And if you can't answer that question, you're probably not engaging in a lot of divergent thinking. Let's keep the quotes coming. Linus Pauling, he was the inventor of the Linux operating system, said, the best way to have a good idea is to have lots of ideas. And the best way to have lots of ideas, again, is to engage in divergent thinking. So what does this look like in practice? Like what can those are kind of abstract or more ethereal thoughts. So what does this mean for us as individuals? Well, the first one is indulge your curiosity. Really give yourself the freedom to go down rabbit holes. I used to pursue a variety of hobbies, and I would get interested in it. I would read 3 books on the topic, and I would go buy the gear, and a month later I would lose interest, and I would beat myself up about that, and I don't do that anymore. I now realize that that's how you learn. That's how you get good. It's how you learn what you like. It's how you learn about what you want to get good at. So creating systems and structures around you that facilitate that allow you to indulge your curiosity, I think is critical. And that can be travel, that can be reading, that can be nurturing relationships with people that are outside of your normal, kind of social circles. I use this picture of an oyster because the old adage of imagine how brave the first person to eat an oyster must have been, right? And, thank God they did it, right? The other one is pursue intersection. What makes people valuable, important, interesting, what makes cities valuable, important, interesting, businesses, et cetera, it's never one thing. It's always the intersection of things, right? So I usually counsel people against this idea of focus to the exclusion of everything else. I'm positive there are certain vocations where a ridiculous level of maniacal focus is a good thing. Neurosurgeons out there, much love. But if you're moving into an entrepreneurial kind of creative, kind of innovation-centric industry, you need to be really good at lots of things. And where those things intersect is oftentimes where your personal arbitrage manifests itself. So I encourage people not to worry too much about going deep on one thing, specifically early on in their career, but to really think about how they cultivate the intersection of their interests and experiences. This is a big one. I know tons of very, very creative, very, very talented, very, very innovative people who are incapable of communicating their ideas to others, and more specifically, just aren't good at sales. You can invent the best X or the best Y or the best Z. You could have designed the most beautiful logo or product interface. If you're not capable of selling that vision to others, because remember, most of the world is wrong, your innovation is going to have a very, very hard time seeing the light of day. So I encourage folks, regardless of their chosen discipline, to really focus on A, getting good at communicating. It's important as a human being, but more specifically, thinking about how that translates into sales, how you sell yourself, how you sell your ideas. And finally, having a posture of optimism, cultivating optimism. This is probably the most underrated skill that innovators and entrepreneurs are required to possess. Now, I'm a fan of ruthless pragmatism. I think that's very important, but it's really hard to do something big and disruptive and world-changing unless you're dancing on the edge of optimism and delusion, right? I think optimism in many ways is just a more polite way of talking about that. There was a remarkable study conducted, over a decade ago, trying to understand the distinctions between how pessimists and optimists operate in society. And it's really fascinating. The researcher had 100 people self-select into 2 groups of pessimists and optimists, and gave them a fairly complex 3-dimensional puzzle to put together. And he asked those 2 cohorts, who amongst you believe you'll be capable of putting this puzzle together? And as you might imagine, the pessimists whipped the optimists in terms of being able to predict their ability to do it. They're just practical, right? They then asked the research subjects, how long do you think it will take you to put this together if you think you're capable of doing it? And again, the pessimists far and away whipped the optimists in terms of their ability to predict how long it would take. But in an interesting turn of events, which of those 2 groups do you think was more successful in completing the puzzle? And again, far and away, it was the optimists that were able to do that. Why, you might ask? Well, if you know how hard something's going to be, how long it's going to take, how much it's going to cost, how much it's going to strain your relationships, most people just don't start those things, right? Because they're normal, rational human beings. There's a quote that says, the reasonable man conforms himself to the world. And the unreasonable man forces the world to conform itself to them. Therefore, all progress is a function of the unreasonable man, right? So somewhere in that quote is this truth around you have to believe that you're going to be capable of doing it, and you probably have to have an almost delusion level belief in that for you to be able to accomplish it. And we so often look specifically at young folks and try to get them to be more practical, more pragmatic. And I think in the process, we end up beating a lot of what is required in order to be a world changer out of them, which is, in its simplest form, optimism. I really credit my time at Andersen University in helping me cultivate my sense of curiosity and helping me understand that I wasn't just a one-dimensional carbon-based life form, but rather I was complex and nuanced and was the result of the intersection of a lot of things. Andersen taught me how to be a better communicator, and by virtue of that, become a better salesperson and be able to communicate my ideas to the broader world. And finally, Andersen University is a place of overwhelming and abundant optimism. I walked away from my experience, my 4 years in Andersen, with a reason to be optimistic. And that has fueled my career in a way that it's hard for me to overstate. So if you're considering attending Andersen University, if you're a prospective student checking this video out for the first time, and you only remember one thing, remember this. This is a community, this is a place where regardless of what vocation you choose upon graduation, you will be better equipped to pursue a life of entrepreneurship, innovation, and creativity.